Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles in Leadership series. My name is Daryl Lim. I serve as the H. Letty Montag Junior Chair and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the Law School. This series offers an opportunity to glean insights from top leaders. In each episode, we invite these leaders to reflect on their journeys, share their skills, core values, and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. We're very pleased today to have Kate Hudson, who serves as Deputy Vice President and Counsel for Government Relations and Public Policy at the Association of American Universities. In this role, she leads federal advocacy efforts on key issues affecting research universities, including intellectual property, technology transfer, data privacy, and regulatory compliance. Her extensive background in both the executive and legislative branches of the U.S. federal government informs a strategic approach to policy development and advocacy. Before joining AU, she has held senior legal positions in the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the Office of Personnel Management, and the General Services Administration. Her multifaceted legal experience positions her as a leading voice in higher education policy, particularly in areas intersecting law, innovation, and public service. And on a personal note, I'm also very pleased she serves on Penn State Dickinson Law's IP and Innovation Initiatives Advisory Board. Welcome, Kate.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
So, first of all, take us back to before you held these lofty positions.
I don't know about lofty, but yes.
Where were you born?
Yeah.
How was your childhood like? Tell us about your formative years.
Are my parents going to watch this? Well, I am originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, born and raised Ohioan, and I attended Ohio University for my bachelor's and my first master's degree. I have always been interested in politics and government since I attended with my school trip to Washington, D.C. for President Clinton's second inauguration. I remember meeting Hill staff and a number of other stops we made and folks we met during our time in D.C. And I called my parents from a payphone at the corner of 14th and Constitution and said, I found what I want to do with my life. And I was 16 at the time, so my parents were elated / terrified because that meant I was going to go to DC, but they prepared themselves. And but I had a great upbringing in the Midwest. My mother is from just outside of Detroit, so a suburban, urban, background on my mother's side, and my father's side were farmers, tobacco farmers, tenant tobacco farmers in rural Ohio. So I have kind of a mix there of my own background, but being a Midwesterner, there's so many different facets of Midwestern life, but I feel like very spoiled that I had two very different perspectives to grow up with as parents. They were both public school educators as well.
And what were some of the values or principles that you grew up internalized and you think shapes you as a person today?
Absolutely. So watching my parents both in their roles as public servants, as public school teachers and then administrators later, as well as the things that they did in our community. My upbringing was definitely composed of solid experiences, both on purpose and just subconsciously, of the strength of civic life and how you, in order to be a good citizen, need to make not just one contribution, but multiple contributions throughout your life to the good of civil society. And that takes a lot of different forms. That can be everything from volunteer work to working as a public educator, being a Girl Scout leader, volunteering at your board of elections, working seasonally to help charities raise, coat drives for the cold winter months in the Midwest, right? It takes a lot of different forms. And all of them are equally valid, but they are vital to being a good citizen and to being a pillar of your community. And those are things that my parents imparted to me a lot subconsciously, but sometimes very direct, as well as my extended family did as well.
Were you a Girl Scout?
I was a Girl Scout. I went all the way through to high school graduate. So I was an adult Girl Scout. So I started in Brownies and went all the way through.
You still have your badges?
I do actually still have my silver award, still have my uniform. I had great memories. I also got to be a foreign exchange student with the Girl Scouts, which was a very formative experience for me when I was 14.
So talk about college and law school. What do you remember from those days, and how were those years formative for you?
Yeah, I had a great time in college, as people say. OU has always been a really wonderful campus for that intersection of politics, journalism, public policy, campus involvement. So there were a plethora of opportunities for me to take advantage of. As soon as I hit campus, I was volunteering on political campaigns. The biggest being Dale Tamke's run in Ohio for the congressional seat there, or I should say the Ohio House seat there, was my first campaign experience. And everything from student government to all kinds of different opportunities to study abroad and work in public policy internationally, which I took advantage of. So I was in student government, I worked on a lot of political campaigns. And then my part of my senior year of college, I was actually an intern in the newly formed Welsh government following the referendum in 1997 that brought the Labour Party to power and also gave autonomy to the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Parliament, and the Northern Irish Assembly as well. And so getting those opportunities was really incredible in college too, which definitely shaped me into the public policy, emphasis that I've had on my career.
That's very interesting. How did you in school in the United States get involved in Welsh politics?
Well, we had, funny enough, my school has had a longstanding internship program. And following the creation of the Welsh Assembly, it was just an incredible period. How many times is there a brand new legislature? And not to go into the weeds too far, but the Scottish Parliament existed before 1707. And Northern Ireland is a different animal, so to speak, in terms of the colonial imperialistic relationship between England and Northern Ireland. But Wales never had a legislature. They were conquered in 1128. And so this is a brand new legislative power being brought to a modern population. And what are they going to expect from their government? What does that look like? You also have a bilingual population in Wales. And so grappling with some of those, language issues to make sure you have two official languages for all government documents is something really important to the Welsh people. But it's honestly because my college already had a pre-existing relationship with the University of Swansea and the faculty there that they were able to carve out that program, and I was able to take advantage of it.
And do you speak the language?
No. I learned a few words here and there, but it is an intensely difficult language. My French minor did not serve me well in trying to adapt to Welsh. It was a very difficult language for me, but I can recognize it. I can see it in a document. No, well, that is Welsh, but I cannot translate it for you.
So law school,
Yes. So law
how was
school.
that?
Yeah, law school was great. I was a non-traditional student, which means I went out into the world and worked between my bachelor's, or actually I finished my first master's degree. I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked for a number of organizations, the one right before law school being the American Hospital Association. So I supported a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. Hi, Debbie Weiner, if you're still out there, who was really pivotal in my career point of seeing how grassroots advocacy from an association standpoint would work. And so got to work on a lot of cool projects like the Patient's Bill of Rights that had not pre-existed. And I just got to see a lot of really great sausage being made in public policy. And so leaving and going to law school after that really had already kind of determined a direction for me. I knew I did not want to do corporate law. I knew I didn't want to do big law. So I was really like, what am I really going to be here for? And so I actually did law school in 2 years instead of 3, as part of a brand new program out of the University of Dayton. I had also gotten married to an active duty Army service member, and this was in 2005, 2006, if you remember what was going on with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And so he took back-to-back deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan while I did law school in 2 years. And it was a great program. I really valued my time at Dayton because it meant that I could remove myself a little bit from the hustle and bustle of Washington, D.C., but I also moved closer and lived with my parents. So I had that great support network while I went to law school as well, given that my husband was deployed on combat duty.
So talk about multitasking.
Just a few
It,
things going on. I had nothing going on, so obviously I wanted to go to law school. So
it seems almost like your college education and your law school education were incidental to everything else that was going on during that time.
yeah, pretty much. Yes.
And talk about a long distance relationship.
Yes, yeah, it's very difficult. And service members in the early 2000s did not have quite at all the ability to communicate in the way that many service members communicate with their families now through satellite phones and email. My husband's first deployment to Africa was very much a sending letters weeks apart kind of courtship, which I guess that kind of sounds romantic now in the days of, text messages and emails and did you see this on Instagram? So I actually had kind of an old school courtship and we still have the letters.
So did you ever argue over letters?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Correct. Yeah. Which feels like playing chess from across the world, but we can deep dive on that sometime.
And you still have the letters?
We do. We each have a box of our own letters.
Ah,
Sent
so
to each-
you're a sentimental person or
Yes.
just a hoarder?
Yeah, I'm a sentimental person for sure. For sure.
Okay, so you graduate and then what happens?
So I graduate, and my husband was stationed in Augusta, Georgia, at Fort Gordon, and so I had to take the Georgia bar. So then we reunite in Augusta, Georgia. I prep for the bar while he begins his new command, which was very interesting. I knew absolutely no one in Georgia. This would also be the first time that I would actually live on a military base since we got married in 2005. So that we're up to 2008 at this point. So I had never lived on a military base. So it was a big cultural shock. I'd also never lived in the deep South. So that was definitely an acclimation. I took the bar, passed, and I got my first job as an attorney at Georgia Legal Service Program, which provides civil legal services to low-income and indigent clientele throughout. I had a 13 county area in Georgia, not Atlanta, but outside of Atlanta.
So all sorts of questions there. I never lived, actually, I did live on a military base for 2 years. I had a curfew. Did you have a curfew?
Yes. Yeah, there was a curfew. Yes. Yes.
And where do you go for groceries?
Oh, well, I mean, the commissary was right there on post, or you're free to, leave during the non-curfew hours. Could go off that, but definitely used the commissary a lot on base.
So commissary, is that the military term for supermarket?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Do they, were the prices as good as those in a supermarket?
They're better, actually. The DoD has a pretty great operation for commissaries and actually has a way to provide a wide spectrum of groceries and things from back home that people might want, especially when you're living abroad and other military bases outside of the United States. But it's also a government benefit for us. So you don't pay tax on it and the prices are better.
You miss that?
Sometimes. I think I missed it more. I don't miss it as much now because I'm not in a position where I'm doing the shopping anymore. So
Who does the shopping?
Mike does, my husband does.
Oh,
And he's excellent at it. I highly recommend getting an Army acquisitions officer to be your household manager, to be your grocery, your meal planner, your grocery getter. Like he's excellent at that. Like I get that military precision at home and it's wonderful.
wonderful. Well, my father was in the military, so I experienced some of that myself.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, graduate law school,
Mhm.
you get your first job.
Yes. Yeah. It
Tell us
was
about that.
incredible. I mean, it was equal parts, cultural shock. Also, I was a baby lawyer, just really learning how to work with individual clients. I also had a lot of autonomy, just because of the client base that you have. Oh, people always coming in the door. I had a lot of different cases, but it was a truly incredible experience because I was handling such a wide swath of types of civil law, and the impact you feel immediately with that person. Saving someone from eviction, I think is aside from a person that you are working to keep out of jail. Saving a person from eviction is I feel like the most impactful, second only to jail time, right? Like this is literally about the roof over this person's head. and saving someone from eviction or negotiating with their landlord or their housing authority in a way that gives them time to secure a new place to live. A lot of times the parties are not going to get along, and it's just best if they go their separate ways. But having an advocate there in the middle to buy time to properly, negotiate that extrication, right, and buying that time so that person does not end up homeless. I had clients for whom I was not able to succeed in saving from eviction, and immediately that they're going to be without a home in 72 hours, and that's a lot of pressure. But it's something that I really valued, the trust that my clients put in to me for that. I also did a lot of unemployment compensation law, and this was during the recession. So I graduated in 2008, started my job at GLSP and later in 2008, and then with all the continuing effects of the Great Recession over my entire time there. So, but getting to do everything from domestic violence proceedings, child custody, employment benefits, accusations of food stamp fraud. You just did so many things, and I had great mentors who really took me under their wing. And it's not just about learning the law; it's about learning to relate to your client, have a relationship with the client, even if your client is in the worst case scenario, having access and helping them making informed decisions is, I feel like, the best part of legal counsel. Your client is in a bad situation. You need to play for time. They need to be able to make a decision about their future, a huge decision about their future. And you are their guide, right? They're guiding them through. And it makes the judicial system accessible for people, right? Like equity of outcome is definitely an important part, but equity of access and being able to make an informed decision, especially with low income and indigent clientele, is so, so, so important. And so that job was very easy to get out of bed for every day. Even though I had a lot of cases, a lot of clients, it was very easy to get out of bed for.
That's amazing for a number of reasons, because you have abuse cases, you have eviction cases, you want to build relationships with them,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of them, and it's heavy stuff. So how do you manage all of this?
I think I learned so much about myself, for my own emotional regulation, but also, trying to find that sweet spot of giving enough of yourself emotionally to the client, even when I'm giving bad news, but also taking the time to refill my own cup emotionally. And I don't think that is something that lawyers are comfortable talking about. Law schools certainly are not comfortable talking about it, no offense. But that is not exactly a class in law school, at least when I was attending class. Maybe it has changed since now, but since then. But there's so many emotional aspects to the practice of law, and being able to maintain my composure in some really difficult situations, some very heartbreaking situations. And this also extends to my time as a public defender. I learned so much about how I need to take time to refill my cup. It's extremely easy to burn out as a legal services attorney and as a public defender. It's so easy. And you also can, not everyone, but experience a lot of vicarious trauma when you represent individuals that are going through these really terrible situations, or really terrible things have happened to them, and you are helping them navigate it. And so I learned a lot about myself. I mean, certainly it's been a journey to get to a holistic frame of mind where I can really give my all to my clients, but also retain my own emotional boundaries and make sure I don't burn out, or that I don't experience too high of levels of vicarious trauma. That first 7.5 years of my career were definitely, that was a week-to-week battle for sure.
So how did you make sure that when you left the office, you came home to Mike that didn't follow you into the living room?
I think you might want to call him, because he probably would say I didn't do a good job at it. For me, creativity has always been an outlet. I don't profess to be, an artist and hanging things, at MoMA or anything, but creativity has always been a really big outlet for me, either in the form of, textile arts or painting, or listening to music, and kind of putting that side of things away for a bit, and really refilling my own cup from that creative outlet continues to be something that I do now. When I put it on the shelf and I don't get that outlet, those are the times when I experience burnout or it's too stressful. Taking the time for that has always been a battle, but that is a way that I have managed to put it to the side. I also was a young mother during this time. I had my first child in 2009 and my second in 2013. And so I also, had that journey as becoming a mother as well. And a military spouse. My husband was on a constant, deployment cycle. So up tempo. So it is, I can put some of that to the side and not worry about paperwork when, we're getting ready to send him away for 6 months is, it's easier to put work to the side when you have those kinds of things happening on the personal front.
And how is it like parenting teenagers?
It's interesting. It's such a fun age. It's very different. It's very different. And I have a really insightful 15-year-old. My eldest is autistic and really cuts to the quick on some questions in a way that, it helps me understand how his brain works and goes right to the front of the line, right to the heart of the matter, right? He's like, and why would you do that? Well, I think I need to explain that to you. Sometimes adults, right? Like, so making those kinds of explanations, but they're so fun to travel with. We have a blast with them. They're both of them have very different senses of humor. They don't complement each other in that way, but we get a lot of different types of humor from both of them. I'm looking forward to it. We're starting to navigate college choices and what the next couple of years look like for our eldest. And so I know that this is such a precious time. I'm going to blink and he'll be gone away on campus. And I'm really trying to enjoy and soak up what I have, even on the days where he didn't turn his homework in on time, or he didn't clean his room, or he needs to take a shower because he smells.
So parenting kids with autism apparently is more common than I think many people think. And for many people, I think they struggle silently.
Mhm.
You're open about it, and I think that gives people hope. But can you also share some insights from your experience about what you've learned in that parenting process?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing you can do is to first admit that you don't know. You don't know how your kid's brain works. Because you're constantly learning about it, because they are growing as you are learning about it. And so the first order of business, especially as someone who is, educated and a working professional and things like it, that can be a little bit of an ego issue and be like, I don't know everything. I don't know how to fix this situation. There's no fixing autism, right? There's no fixing the situation. There's no, someday I'm going to figure it out and it's going to be like the perfect skeleton key that unlocks everything. Toss that to the wayside, toss your ego to the wayside, and then learning more about how you look at things and not assuming that that is the default way that that your kids will look at it as well. And it's not just a product of age. It's not just because they've never been on a first date, or they've never, or they've never gone to a baseball game. With an autistic person, and everyone is different. Everyone experiences it differently. And so I can go on my experiences, but they are constantly reevaluating the world in a way that I don't think I would ever have operated from that approach. And really educating them about our world and the way that you interact with people in a way that you may not have had to do with a non-autistic child. My eldest has a lot of questions, intuitive questions about human reactions. Like, he's like, is that sarcasm? Was that not okay when he said that to her when we watch a TV show together? He does a lot of questioning on that interpersonal side of it. Whereas, I may not experience that with my 12-year-old who is non-autistic. So just being open to those experiences and knowing that it is not something that you can just find the right combination to and fix. This is not a fixable situation, but you do need to understand how your kid's brain works and the conditions under which they thrive, and the things that you are going to help that are going to be very difficult for them, that you're going to have to help them navigate as they progress into adulthood. So those are probably the three things that I would say to any parent of an autistic child at any age.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's no, I'm sure is very beneficial to many of our viewers. So take us then to North Carolina and then to the government.
Oh, wow. Well, two big chapters there. So, like any good military family, we got restationed in North Carolina. So I unfortunately did not qualify for enough months of active law practice to qualify for the accommodation for military spouses in North Carolina. And so I had to take a whole nother bar exam after being a practicing attorney, and could not waive in North Carolina. So took some time. We moved to North Carolina and my husband was deployed about 4 weeks later. So there I am in another state. I don't know a single human being. I'm prepping for the bar with, with a 16-month-old and really trying to navigate what is our life going to look like now while he's gone, and what does it look like when he comes back? What am I going to do? Work is such an important part of my life. And being a lawyer and having that kind of career has always been very important to me since I decided to become a lawyer. So what is that going to look like? North Carolina was really a place where I had to get out of my comfort zone. I cold called a few practitioners in the area and I was like, hey, could we go to lunch? I'm new here. And I will say, to a fault, every single person I reached out to was not only like, yes, absolutely, but was like, what can I do for you? How can I get you involved in the legal community? What can we do? Like, we know you're a military spouse, so you may not be here forever, but what can we do for you right now? And I was just very fortunate. I think I just happened to like win the lottery with the people, with the practitioners that I called. And then when I passed the bar, I hung out my own shingle doing cases where I knew there was a niche, right? So unemployment benefit cases, there are not a whole lot of private attorneys that do that outside of the legal aid environment, taking different kinds of cases that there was somewhat of a gap in the legal community. And so then those individuals that I had met with, then they sent business to me, and right, a little virtuous cycle there. And then I learned so much more. And so, but I didn't like the business aspects of running a law firm. I'll be quite frank with you. I also, at that point in my life, hated talking about money with clients. I just couldn't. I think it's the like Midwesterner in me. I just couldn't talk about, hey, I want to fix your driving record, but you owe me $15,000. I just couldn't say those things. So that was difficult for me. So I actually did a trial in the courthouse, and there was another attorney kind of observing, like, it's an open courtroom. People come and go, and kind of saw what I was doing. And I walked out to the back hall when we recessed, and he said, hi, my name is Matt Cockman. Would you like a job as a public defender? And I said, absolutely, sir. He said, how soon can you close your firm? And I was like, 2 weeks. So that's the story of how I became a public defender in the 13th Judicial District in North Carolina. And that was a great transition. It was such a blend of my experience with working with clients with Georgia Legal Services Program in Georgia, but also a newer area of law, criminal law. Going into that is a big jump, but having that mentorship in the office and starting small, with docket calls and moving up to full jury trials. And that was a really incredible experience. I will say it's heartbreaking to be a public defender. If it's not heartbreaking to be a public defender, you should not be doing that job. It's really not great, but working with clients and having such a direct impact in their lives was both the largest source of stress and pressure, but also the most rewarding parts of it was
So
working directly with clients.
you worked in housing eviction cases. You worked with domestic violence abuse cases.
Yep.
I don't think you had mentioned heartbreaking until you talked about being a public defender. What was it about being a public defender that made it so difficult?
So I know that it's very, very fashionable to talk about bail reform in the country, and jail conditions in the country now, and the inequities of, police investigations, arrests, and police brutality. I know those are things that we have talked about in the national discourse now. Those were not such hot topics that were getting support and mainstream discussion about changing those things back when I was a public defender. And so it was heartbreaking to know that if I couldn't get a client out on bail, they would lose their job. The children that were coming off of the school bus would be taken by CPS. If they weren't back in their apartment, their landlord would probably just throw their stuff out on the porch because they would not make the rent payment while they were awaiting their court dates. And then also the personal aspects of it, you know, not being able to see your children, not being able to see your family or your loved ones, and knowing how even an innocent person who has been charged with a crime and is afforded due process by the Constitution, bail remains an impediment to that equitable accessibility. And knowing how that would absolutely snowball and ruin someone's life, spending 2-3 weeks in jail, just with nothing, no ability to call anyone, contact anyone. Think about what would happen to your life if you just disappeared for 3 weeks or 3 months.
You
Even
fall apart.
I
Yeah.
had cases where they could not make bail for months,
Mm.
and months. And, you know, you get out and you have nothing. Everything is gone. Even if you're found not guilty, there's no apology, there's no recompense, there's no nothing. And so such a baseline issue like that, to me, was so much more heartbreaking than even some of the really dramatic personal situations and legal situations that my Georgia Legal Service civil clients were in, right? Just that abject, you know, being at the mercy of the system, basically. There are a lot of other components to it, but that was one that is just really huge for me.
So when did the government come knocking?
Well, when we got stationed in another state. So my husband was stationed in Virginia in 2015, back in the DC area, which we had met here in DC and back in the early 2000s. And so it was, in some ways, it was like coming home. But I was also a very, very different person by then. I'd gone to law school. I'd worked in 2 states. I'd lived away from my family, for even my immediate family, you know, back in Ohio, for an even longer period of time. And so, I mean, I was definitely a different person coming back. And I had so many more options career-wise coming back to DC by considering a career in the federal government than I necessarily did in less populous, less people dense areas where we were stationed in Georgia and North Carolina. And so I almost had decision paralysis. I was like, there's just so much. And so I was fortunate to be near the end of my time in North Carolina. I joined a group called the Military Spouse JD Network, which is an association of lawyers who are married to military service members across the branches, across the statuses: active, guard, reserve, and retired. And I was fortunate to really find such a community of people there that I didn't know existed before. And it was through that network and just meeting other spouses like me who were trying to practice law, trying to have a career. Many are parents, and trying to navigate all of those concerns while also you know, juggling their spouse's career, which oftentimes at that point definitely involved constant deployments like mine. So so that group really changed the trajectory of my career. And I told a funny story about my dress splitting in a courtroom when I was pregnant to one member of MSJDN, and she told it to another, and at a cocktail party here in DC. And the woman who laughed her butt off at that story said, "Haha, she's coming back here to DC. Does she need a job?" So, you know, that informal networking and
That's how you got
support.
your job?
That's how I joined the government. No, I did interview for my position, but that was how, you know, folks in the government learned about me and my aspirations. And so, working with them, and I applied to a number of positions, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But, you know, I applied to the PD's office here. I thought about remaining a PD and going to the District of Columbia PD's office, or go to a legal aid environment. But folks were really like, you know, you should really think about federal government service. However, it is a big change going from individual clients to organizational clients. And I was a little scared of that. I will be quite frank with you. I was like, oh, I can't do that. I'm just an individual client kind of girl, right? Right. But fortunately, I was fortunate to get an opportunity to join the General Services Administration, which is the most powerful government agency that you've never heard of.
So tell us about it.
So GSA does a lot of different functions within the center, or what we say the center of the federal government. This is the nation's landlord. owns the vast majority of the federal buildings that you go into, including courts, and agency buildings and other federal spaces. They are also the agency that, sets standards for what types of toilets the government buys, what kind of paper the government buys, the pens. I don't know if, folks who have any affiliation with federal agencies, but if you've seen the green books that people have in the government, that is a GSA decision to buy those from a vendor. They are also the agency charged with the presidential transition. And so that was a very unique experience. It was the first time that a presidential transition that had appropriated funds and office space was going to go forward and be supported by the General Services Administration. So I came in at a really pivotal time in the summer of 2015, and then having that next presidential election right just a few months after I had joined. So GSA was an incredible experience. I got to really operate in the nucleus of the federal government at a very high level, working with folks from OMB, the West Wing, and other high-level agencies and cabinet level officials on a weekly basis. So it was great. I can't say enough about it.
And GSA wasn't the only agency you were with.
No, it was just the first. Following in November of 2016, following the election, I actually walked right across the street and started at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, which I know until recently, a lot of people didn't know what that agency was either. That is the government's HR, basically setting the standards for merit, for the competitive service, all of the merit systems protections that we have with the civil service. It is the successor agency to the Civil Service Commission that was formed in 1968 and became an agency itself in 1970. It also, until recently, completed the national security background checks for a whole host of government agencies outside of the intelligence branch, so to speak, as well as maintaining all of the retirement. Federal retirement comes from OPM as well. And so it's kind of they have a number of different missions. And so that was also an incredible experience, getting to do a lot of different things, both as a litigator, both representing the federal government before administrative tribunals, and as agency counsel with DOJ in instances where my agency is being sued from the outside, as well as becoming more of a policy and regulatory attorney as well. It was definitely a crucible of experience doing both things, but really helped to develop me in both ways. That move into federal litigation, as well as federal regulatory policy and redrafting, Code of Federal Regulations, drafting executive orders and moving them through interagency review, but also representing the interests of my agency before the federal courts.
And there was an incident at that time. There was a cyber breach.
Just a little. I came in right afterwards, so right after the breach, but the litigation had already been filed against OPM. OPM's mainframe and computer systems were breached by what now has been publicly made known as actors affiliated with the Chinese government, and knowing about wanting to know more about who works for the federal government and that personal information, right? And so that was a large-scale crisis. This is before two-factor authentication was the standard. This was before that. So folks are like, oh, how would they get so breached now? Like, two-factor authentication was not ubiquitous back then. And so you had some problems with contractors getting hacked and then using those credentials to hack us. But I was on that litigation, which was large-scale, which had, a potential potential liability of over $2 billion under the Privacy Act. It's the largest lawsuit alleging Privacy Act violations by the federal government in U.S. Jewish jurisprudence. I mean, we hear about data breaches all the time in the private sector, but this is a government data breach that had individual information that falls under the Privacy Act for unauthorized disclosures. And so that was an incredible part of my working there, in addition to representing, before the Merit Systems Protection Board, the EEOC, and then in other cases where other agency actions were being contested.
And so what happened career-wise after that?
So career-wise after that, I really I was really burnt out on litigation. I'll be honest, I had been doing litigation since 2008. And at that point it was 2020.
Yeah.
And that was I am very, very thankful for the experiences that I had at OPM, but it was incredibly, incredibly intense. I also had two very young children during this time, and I also foolishly had entered a grad school program and was getting a fourth degree, which I wouldn't recommend to people to do that. That's a little bit too much going on top of my work, my volunteer work as a pro bono attorney in the District of Columbia, and my nonprofit board service. It was a pretty intense time for me, and I wanted to take a step back and really kind of decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. And so I moved out of a litigating role to a senior counsel role that was not litigation. And that is when I moved from the executive branch at OPM to the Government Accountability Office, which is part of the legislative branch. And while there, I was the legal counsel behind the oversight, many of the oversight and investigations teams that GAO has throughout its different sectors inside of the agency, and also worked as a technical expert advising the staffs of members of Congress on legislative drafting technical questions to get to the outcomes that they were seeking from those revisions.
It seems almost that surreal, the career trajectory that you've had.
It is.
Uh,
It is.
it fills the resumes, I think, of at least 4 or 5 different people.
It does feel like that.
But
It does.
it doesn't even stop there, because at that
No.
point, then you decide to move to your current organization.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did that happen?
So I am actually a public service loan forgiveness program success story. My loans were discharged under PSLF. It took me a little longer than the 10 years because of the breaks in time that I had with all of our military moves. But I had my student loans discharged, and that is something that I had stayed in. I didn't just stay in government service for that, but it was a key component of it. I already had 7 and some years when I came to the federal government worth of credit on PSLF. So it behooved me to stay and finish out. I also was really, pardon me, having some reflective conversations about what do I want to do next as an advocate? I had done all types of, litigation and advocacy and working at the highest levels of government. And then working behind the scenes at GAO to advise, obviously, I mean, the Comptroller General is at GAO, some very, very important legal aspects of government policy and government accounting. And what did I want next? And I think for me, the thread that is common in my career trajectory is the level of impact. So going from, on the ground, individual person in my office in rural Georgia, helping to save their food stamps, that impact with one person, and scaling that up through my organizational clients, through government clients, and choosing to find another source of impact following government service. And that's really what got me kind of exploring that. What does this look like for me? I also wanted something that would work for the season that my family was in, and it continues to be in right now. We were also quickly approaching my husband's retirement from active duty military service. And when he made the decision to not stay longer than 20 years, that has a huge effect. We made that decision together, but that also had massive implications for what kind of career would even be open to me, what kind of work arrangements I could do, how intense a travel schedule I could take. All of those components and variables all mashing together. And those were the kinds of conversations that we were having when I said, it's an option for me to leave government now. And I can go into the nonprofit sector, I can go into the private sector. All of those thoughts were going through my head. And it's really kismet that I was having these kinds of conversations with folks, and they would say, oh, this has been a great conversation. I want you to talk to these 3 people, right? And I would go and talk to them. And as that gained momentum, I had people, reaching out to me and saying, oh, you should talk to this person. And I actually met with a recruiter at Major Lindsay in Africa. She said, I can't take you on as a client, but if you apply for a position and we're considering you, you should definitely take a look at what's on our website. And I saw the AAU position, and it required government relations, which I had a little bit of from way back pre-law school at the American Hospital Association. But what they were looking for was someone with that intense amount of legislative, regulatory, and litigation experience. They were looking for a unicorn, and I happen to be a unicorn in that space. So unicorn met unicorn. But I actually, meeting the gentleman who is now my boss, Toby Smith, really, really sealed the deal for me in learning about just how large scale and constant of an impact I would make in public policy in this position, and how setting the messaging and the narrative and working those connections, both formally and informally, is a whole new level of advocacy and impact that I did not have experience in. And so that was really attractive to me, to continue to challenge myself, to learn more and new areas of law. I have a great foundation of litigation and regulatory experience, and then superimposing the areas of law that are most relevant for my institutions and for the innovation ecosystem writ large, because I do IP and tech transfer, and marrying those things together, as well as my savvy in government affairs and kind of reading the tea leaves on administrations. Having experience in the Obama administration and the Trump administration was extremely valuable, and it continues to be valuable today in my work as I advise not only our organizations, but make predictions and talk about different policy paths that this administration is going down. So it all builds on it. I know it doesn't seem like doing food stamp cases and jaywalking tickets like can equate, but it does. It's cumulative experience over time, and it has helped me to work on a unique set of transferable skills that brought me into this position. And now I'm in my 4th year here at AAU, and really I'm really hunkered down now in our issues, and I love it. No 2 days are the same. No 2 weeks are the same. Sometimes no 2 hours are the same. But I need that. I need that, like, fast moving, time sensitive, you are having a real impact. Making phone calls and changing votes on the floor is a very real thing, and protecting the members that I represent in ways big and small is a really great way to serve our civic society, especially fighting for research institutions and academic progress in the United States.
And that's certainly been something that's made the news recently. So as
Yes.
we get to this last phase of our chat, I do want to spend some time talking about what's been keeping you busy. And I'm sure lots of folks have read the news. They may not know AAU's work in that regard. So tell us what we need to know about how AAU has been interfacing with the front page headlines.
Absolutely. So AAU is we are over 125 years old now, and I currently represent 69 US and 2 Canadian top level research universities. So these are the universities that are coming up with some of the most innovative research advancements, names that you will all recognize, right? And getting to represent them is really incredible, and it's an incredible set of issues, because my portfolio and our portfolio as an association is very broad. So everything from export controls and research security, IP and tech transfer issues, open access and copyright, those are kind of over here in my public policy groups stash. But then we also have higher education issues of Title IX and academic freedom, campus free speech, right? Unionization, labor laws, tax. I also do tax and endowments. It's a pretty broad spectrum, but AAU brings together the presidents and chancellors of all of those individual universities and acts as a convening body of peers. So we can have those really critical internal conversations, but also we represent the interests externally of those research universities. And so what is most notably in the headlines now is that for the first time in 125 years, AAU, in conjunction with some of our member institutions and 2 other higher education associations, APLU and ACE, have filed suits against the Trump administration, 3 different agencies, NIH, Department of Energy, and NSF, for policies that the administration wants to put in place that would severely damage the university research ecosystem. These are collectively known as the caps, the 15% caps on what's called F&A, facilities and administration. And this is a real bedrock issue in the negotiated like national, how do I say this? The foundation in the United States that is the partnership between government, universities, and the private sector, right? And the federal government funds research, contracts our universities to perform research in the public good because the federal government is not going to perform it and the private sector is not going to perform it. And so those research advancements and whether those get commercialized or drawn into further research and development is a partnership between universities and private sector partners like companies, startups, and small businesses. And we do a lot of that subject to the Bayh-Dole Act, which, we can talk about in a whole nother session. But the relationship right now between the government and research universities is one that is being inappropriately changed, I guess is my way to put it. And we are fighting on behalf of our research institutions so that we don't have these absolutely irreparable pieces of damage and harm that will happen on our campuses that will destabilize the entire research enterprise in some very meaningful ways that in theory, many of them could not be repaired. And so that is why we have been forced to take legal action. We have always been a partner with the federal government. Every single administration, Democrat, Republican, every single Congress, whether they've been controlled by Democrats or by Republicans throughout our entire history, right? But we are at a place where we didn't have a choice. And that is what is being kind of, adjudicated in the headlines, and it is bringing people to more visibility to AAU from that side of things. But we have always been at the table, and we will continue to be at the table with our government partners and colleagues in effectuating and helping to maintain that academic research enterprise, which is it's the crown jewel. It is when we want to talk about American exceptionalism, the academic research enterprise in the United States is highly unique, and it is unlike any other country or any other group of countries, even the EU, even putting all EU countries together, right? That is such an exceptional American asset. And what's happening right now is really a self-enforced error.
And so how can folks listening to this help?
Yeah, you can talk to your congressional delegation. You can talk to your congressional delegation, get to, go. I mean, the voter box is still very effective.
But what do you say to folks that looking at the news? It seems like Congress has been largely silent in the face of many of these executive branch initiatives.
Yeah, understanding that, when leaders of Congress and the president are in the same party, that can make criticism and moving against your own president a very dicey proposition. And that is irrespective of what party you're in. That is always a delicate situation on every issue. Recognizing that, but we do have champions and allies in Congress that I will admit we wish they were a little bit louder right now. We wish that there was a little more fighting for this. I think that many times there seems to be a disconnect between what the White House does and what Congress knows about. That is also, I think, playing into this, into this dynamic as well. And it's difficult to watch this unfold, knowing that we fought so hard to get to this point. All of us, American society, fought so hard to get to this point, this level of innovation and progress, and becoming this just, absolutely outstanding innovation economy globally, that it's really difficult seeing these things that are happening that don't have to happen. That is a whole new level of feeling like a canary in the coal mine, truly. And so there are a lot of things that folks can do. They can get politically active, politically involved, talk to your congressional delegation. It's especially important for, for people to remind all members of Congress just how deeply ingrained economic and innovation success is with our colleges and universities. And the level of economic development and economic contribution that our entire academic enterprise, not just my members, across the academic enterprise, there's 2,800 institutions of higher education across the United States. They have impacts in every single community. of various levels, but they do have impact. They support jobs, they support your economic infrastructure, and they train the workforce of the future. That is really a key. People need to talk about that with their congressional delegation, on social media, with their friends, their family, anyone who seems skeptical. I know that it is very popular to target a very specific subset of universities that are in the headlines these days, but what's being targeted at them is happening to other universities as well, and you may support those, right? As we often say, you know, everybody hates on, you know, this group, but everybody loves their local university, right? We need people to take it seriously that threats to one are threats to all, and we need to stand up to it. And those are the kinds of messages that I hope people could take forward to their, not just the congressional delegation, but the people that you interact with on a daily basis. And think about the impact to your own life, you know, or your children's lives. You know, do you intend to send your children to college? This is changing that atmosphere, and the changes that Congress is proposing will have a very real impact on even your ability to send your child to college. Let alone, you know, you as an alumni, you know, the loyalty or the great feelings that you have about your undergraduate institution, you know, and what that has enabled you to do in your own life. That is a personal impact that you experience every day.
Thank you. Final question.
Yes.
This is leadership. So looking at your career trajectory to your current position now, what would you say you've learned in terms of leadership?
I really, you know, and I will give credit where credit is due in, you know, watching my husband navigate command and various levels of leadership throughout his career, and learning a lot from that, not just in the military context, but overall as a leader. I will say a lot of my philosophy comes from watching him and watching my parents and how they led. Leadership can be very quiet and very effective. And I find myself drawn to what's called servant leadership, and giving my team the resources and the support that they need to do their jobs and fully perform, and less about them giving me the things that make me look good, right? I need to be informed and I need to make informed decisions, but I need to support them as a preliminary matter so that they are operating on all cylinders, and that my team and then my organization, that we're all doing that together. That servant leadership is like that. The leader goes last, not first. It, like, truly, that is something that I try to embody. I try to live every day, checking in with my teams. You know, even something as small as like, hey, can you just sign this document? I really need to get this turned in. Yes, absolutely. Like, I'm here. I make rounds. I think people laugh at me at the office. I make rounds like a doctor on a hospital floor. Like, hey, how's it going? Checking in with people constantly, and being a very engaged leader and not a distant leader, and making sure that my coworkers know that they can come to me with, you know, with anything, and it's not going to be a situation where I exact, you know, judgment, or, you know, like, I want them to ask questions. And so there are no dumb questions in my office, certainly. I know that's kind of a mishmash of an answer, but I really am committed to cultivating the folks that will come behind me, and to helping support their own career journeys. And when they do better, I do better.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this
Of
episode of
course.
Profiles in Leadership. And
Great.
thank you
Thanks
for
so
your
much, Daryl.
service. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Let me stop recording.